More Rangers trade talk. Alexis Lafreniere, Brennan Othmann, Braden Schneider. Which of these players could and should be on the move?
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1470 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, and we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and now the number one sports podcast network. So it's that time of the season. It's become pretty obvious, I think, just about every single Ranger fan out there that the Rangers are going to need to be in sell mode approaching and right up to this year's trade deadline at the beginning of March. And so today we're going to take a look at three players, and there's a common theme here. These are all players that I feel like could be traded. It all depends on the return. I would not necessarily force any of these three players out the door. I wouldn't give them away just for nothing, but there is merit to moving on from any of these three, and we'll discuss the case for it and the case against it with all three of these players in just a second. We'll eventually work our way to Brennan Othmann and Braden Schneider, but we begin with somebody that has come under fire as a member of this New York Ranger team this season, and certainly last season as well, and that would, of course, be Alexis Lafreniere. And here's why I would not move Lafreniere. To begin with, his play basically fell off a cliff from the second he signed his extension at the beginning of last season, a handful of games into last season. And so I just feel like any return for Alexis Lafreniere is going to be basically microscopic. I just don't understand any team being willing to give the Rangers just about anything in exchange for Lafreniere. Now, granted, there are 31 other teams in this league, and all it takes is one. If the Rangers are desperate enough, if they're just beyond done with Alexis Lafreniere, as I know a lot of fans are, then that's all it would take, a decent return, and maybe they can move on to him. But you got to remember with Lafreniere, for everybody that just keeps saying, trade Lafreniere, trade Lafreniere, trade Lafreniere, not only is his production and therefore his value down right now in terms of what you could acquire in exchange for Alexis Lafreniere in a trade, but you got to remember the contract that he's got right now. I mean, this is not somebody that a team would be renting and then they're free of it when the season ends. No, Alexis Lafreniere is on the first year of a new 7-year contract that pays him $7.45 million per season. That's a lot of money. It's not an astronomical amount, especially as the salary cap continues to rise, from one season to the next. Contracts that seem like a lot now, they won't seem so expensive a year from now, 2 years from now, because it will, assuming the salary cap continues to rise, it will eat up a smaller and smaller percentage of the salary cap. But still, I mean, what has Alexis Lafreniere done this year, or really all of last year, or honestly for the majority of his career, save for that one season where he was with Panarin and Trocheck and everything clicked, that would really make you want to line up and acquire Alexis Lafreniere? Like, the hypothetical that I like to use here for everybody that's saying trade Lafreniere, and again, that idea is not without merit, and I understand that, and if you're done with Lafreniere, I get that, but imagine there's a team in the Western Conference. Alexis Lafreniere is playing for some team on the Western Conference, right? And he's been putting up the same exact numbers there and having the same level of production there as he's had with the New York Rangers to this point in his career. Is anybody that currently wants the Rangers to trade Lafreniere going to be lining up and pushing hard for the Rangers to bring him in from a Western Conference team? That's how you have to look at this. You have to look at this through the eyes of the team that would be, trading for Alexis Lafreniere and trying to acquire him. So that's honestly the biggest reason, and honestly one of the only reasons why I see not to trade Alexis Lafreniere, although I think it's a good enough reason and a big enough reason, an important enough reason not to do it. I think the best thing you can do with Lafreniere, as this team continues to retool or rebuild or whatever they're trying to do, however they want to brand it, right? I think the best thing you can do is honestly just to hope for the best and hope that this gets better. And maybe if there's a time where he goes through a hot streak and all of a sudden he looks a little bit better, but maybe the Rangers think that it's fool's gold and he's not really, that improved of a player, but you can move him based on numbers that he's putting up. Maybe that's the time to strike. Maybe that's the time to do that. To me, you watch him play, there's nothing that he does exceptionally well where you believe he's going to live up to the hype of being a number one overall pick. But honestly, it goes beyond that, at least for me. I mean, because even if you take away the number one draft pick status, I just don't really see anything all that special. Let's actually begin with comparing him to some of the other number one overall picks. And this is going to be a little bit ugly, but bear with me here. So when you look around this league right now, there's a lot of obviously talented players that were taken at number 1 overall, and guys that have already put together Hall of Fame careers, guys that have won the Stanley Cup or multiple Stanley Cups, guys that are among the absolute best in the NHL. And then you've got a group of, younger players that are coming into their own as well. And Alexis Lafreniere just doesn't fit into any of those groups. When you compare him, again, to the other first rounders, you've got guys in their 40s or near their 40s, like Sidney Crosby and Alex Ovechkin, that are still outstanding players and still having, great seasons. Then you've got on the other side of the spectrum, there's younger players like Celebrini, Bedard, Schaefer. None of these 3 players that I just mentioned can even legally order a drink in this country, yet they're out there and they're putting up far better numbers and just far better hockey on tape. If you just want to go by the eye test, than Alexis Lafreniere, for the most part in his career, really ever has. And then I mentioned the group. I mean, this isn't even fair, but you talk about the number 1 overall picks that are, the best players in the world right now. You've got McDavid, you've got McKinnon, you've got Matthews. Alexis Lafreniere obviously can't hold a player, or can't hold a player. He can't hold a candle to any of those players that I just mentioned. But again, even if you take away the number 1 draft pick status, you just forget about the draft, forget about where anybody was ever drafted. He just hasn't been very good. There's games where he'll give you little flashes of hope. I think the Winter Classic was a good example of that. And then he tends to just disappear. And this is somebody who, he does have 4 points in his last 4 games. That might be partially as a result of playing with Artemi Panarin. But even when he's been with Panarin and been on the top power play unit and been with good players out there, he just hasn't been able to put it all together. They're just there's too many turnovers. I mean, there was that one game, I forget who they were playing, but they lost it due to a Lafreniere turnover near the blue line near the end of the game. His passing is nothing to write home about. A lot of people have kind of complained about, his hockey IQ, which doesn't seem like it was as advertised when he was taken number 1 overall. And the effort seems to kind of come and go with Lafreniere. And it's year 6. It's year 6. So all this is to say that the idea of trading Alexis Lafreniere, it doesn't infuriate me. It doesn't really upset me all that much. But it's a situation where, because his value is so low, I'm not going to just give him away for nothing. I think you stay the course and you try to figure out with Lafreniere. There is a specific type of trade with Lafreniere, though, that I think could make some sense for the Rangers' perspective and also from the perspective of a potential dance partner in a trade. And that would be maybe like a 1-for-1 trade where you have somebody on this team or on that team that's at a similar point in his career as Alexis Lafreniere. Somebody that was maybe a high draft pick, not necessarily number 1 overall, but somebody that was a high draft pick and has had moments every now and then. And, you get these glimpses, you get these little flashes every once in a while, but somebody who has not quite been able to put it together. If there's a player like that around the NHL, and we'll look at this, we will identify potential trade targets moving forward for the New York Rangers, guys that are prospects and maybe coming into their own or about to come into their own in the NHL. We'll look at players like this. But if you can do a 1-for-1 where it's Lafreniere and another player who has underachieved but could also use a change of scenery, maybe it's somebody that fits Mike Sullivan's style and fits into his game plan a little bit better than Alexis Lafreniere. That's the kind of trade that I think would make some sense. But I'm certainly not going to give away Alexis Lafreniere for like a 3rd round pick. That doesn't really do anything for me. There might be some people who are listening to this and they would do exactly what I just said, because I know there are some Ranger fans that have gotten to the point where they're just so beyond done with Alexis Lafreniere that they're open to giving him away for a bag of pucks. I've seen that exact comment left in the YouTube section in certain episodes where people say, just trade Lafreniere for a bag of pucks. I won't go that far, but certainly the Rangers should be open for business when it comes to Lafreniere. But if you get nothing or next to nothing as far as a potential return in a trade of Lafreniere, then I say you just hang on to him and you stay the course. But we'll continue talking about other trade candidates. We're going to move on to Brennan Othmann next, and then Braden Schneider. Again, the theme today, guys that potentially could be traded by the Rangers if the situation is right, if the return is good enough, then maybe it makes some sense. But again, these are all guys I wouldn't necessarily look to force out the door, and we'll continue this discussion by focusing in on Brennan Othmann in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is officially in playoff mode. Every game during the NFL playoffs, FanDuel is giving customers even more ways to get in on the action. Because right now, every NFL playoff game day, FanDuel users get a profit boost pack waiting for them inside the app. Each game day, you'll see a pack loaded with multiple profit boosts you can apply to the bets that you like the most. The boosts let you lean into your game day instincts. Whether you're back in momentum, defense, quarterback play, or coaching, every play feels bigger, and the boosts make your bets feel that way too. You make your picks, then apply your profit boost to go after even bigger payouts while the playoffs get rolling. So visit FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL, and grab your profit boost pack every NFL playoff game day. All right, let's go and keep everything rolling here. On Locked On New York Rangers, we got to give a big shout out to the everydayers. As always, thank you guys so much for continuing to support this podcast through all the ups and downs of Ranger hockey. And thank you for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen of the day and for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you have not done so already, go check out our new Everydayer Club. There is access to an ad-free audio feed for Locked On New York Rangers, compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every other major podcast app. There is also an invite to the members-only Locked On Everydayer Club Discord server, which includes a group chat just for listeners of the show. Tap the link in the show notes to learn more. And again, big shout out to the Everydayers. Whatever happens tonight between the Rangers and the Sharks, we're going to be breaking it down in the next episode of Locked On New York Rangers. Thankfully, this is the last time that those of us on the East Coast are going to have to stay up late watching this team. After tonight's game, the latest that a Ranger game start, the rest of the season will be 8 p.m. So, they're 0-2 on this, as far as the late games are concerned on this road trip. The game's starting at 10 o'clock. Maybe they can at least salvage a game here at the very end and make it worth our while to stay up late, but we will see. For right now, let's go ahead, keep the focus on trade talk, and specifically shift the focus to Brennan Othmann. And at this point, I think everybody pretty much knows the story. Former first-round pick. He was actually Chris Drury's first ever first-round pick, or pick of any kind, as general manager of the Rangers. He had been assistant GM for a handful of draft classes before that, but this was the first pick the Rangers made when he was the guy, calling the shots. And Othmann went number 16 overall in 2021. And obviously, this is somebody that has had limited chances, but when he's been given chances, has not yet been able to find his groove in the NHL. This might sound kind of strange for a player that has a grand total of 3 points in 36 games, but I am against the idea of trading Brennan Othmann, and these are the reasons why. Number one, the same thing that we just said about Alexis Lafreniere. The return in a trade for Brennan Othmann would basically be nothing. I don't know what kind of a leg the Rangers have to stand on when it comes to trade negotiations. So for that reason, I just don't really see the point of it. You've got somebody here who you took in the first round, and you're going to just give him away for what, like a 5th round pick, a 4th round pick? I just can't get on board with any kind of game plan that includes that. And he's still obviously a very young player. Number two, he's somebody that is still very affordable. Othmann is still on his ELC. He's making $863K this season. He's also a restricted free agent without arbitration rights after this season. So it looks like he's in line for a very modest raise there. But to me, again, very affordable. You should not be getting rid of. If you're going to rebuild, the idea is to get younger and to have as many players on your roster as you can that have at least some theoretical upside. And believe me, I can't be the only Ranger fan that's been underwhelmed by what Brennan Othmann has done so far. But again, this is kind of the MO when you're rebuilding, is to get younger and try to develop those players. And I realize with the Rangers, player development hasn't exactly been a strength over the past, bunch of seasons, however far you want to go back. But nevertheless, those are the kind of players that you want on your roster. Young guys that have at least some upside. Another thing to consider here, Othmann has only played 36 games. And that's not, a tiny sample size, but it's not a massive sample size either. I feel like it's a little bit too early to give up on a first-round draft pick when we're talking about only 36 total games played. So there's that to consider. Also, we talked about this not too long ago, but the Rangers, as we've discussed, kind of need more players that are difficult to play against. I mean, I know that's such a cliche, and we've heard it so many times from this Ranger team, and they've talked about doing it, and they've basically failed to do it. I don't know how many players on this Ranger team you would describe right now as difficult to play against, but Brennan Othmann could be one of them, even if he doesn't pan out in terms of like, a typical first-round pick where you're looking for offense, especially if you draft a forward and all kinds of, gaudy, point totals. I think, you still can get that from him. You can still get that X factor from him where he's kind of the in-your-face type of player. And again, the biggest theme here with Othmann is that the price is right to hang on to him. Also, with Othmann, I don't feel like trading him really does anything in terms of freeing up a spot, a roster spot, a spot in the lineup for somebody who really needs it. As we've discussed on here, there aren't really too many Ranger prospects that are really knocking down the door, chomping at the bit, and looking like they're ready for big time, the bright lights of the NHL. The one guy that, I think you consider a high upside prospect on this team right now is Gabe Perreault, and he's already here, and he's begun to play a little bit better in recent games. He scored a couple of beautiful goals, so that's obviously great to see. But with Othmann, I mean, if you move on from him, who goes into the lineup in place of him? There's no obvious chance, unless people really want to see Connor Sherry get back into the lineup. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that that's probably not the case for most Ranger fans. So in conclusion here, look, I am not blind to the fact that Brennan Othmann has really struggled. He's really struggled to get anything going from an offensive perspective in the NHL. But I also just don't see the point in trading him unless you can really fleece somebody and get a first rounder in exchange for Othmann. But I mean, who's going to do that? Like, who's going to give up a first round pick for Brennan Othmann? The only case you can make if you're Chris Drury, member of the Rangers front office, and you're trying to trade Brennan Othmann, the only case you can really make is, well, we took him in the first round. I don't think that's really going to hold a lot of weight right now because he just hasn't done enough, and he just hasn't put enough good hockey on tape at the NHL level where I think teams are just going to be enticed by the fact that he used to be a first round pick. And again, this could be another similar situation as Lafreniere. Maybe you're looking at kind of like a 1-for-1 deal. Maybe there's a former first round pick who's very early in his career with this NHL team or that NHL team, still on his ELC, at least has some theoretical upside, and you look at kind of a 1-for-1 swap with two guys that could maybe use a little bit of a change of scenery. You do Othmann for whoever that player might be. And again, we're going to identify some trade targets for the Rangers going forward, like I mentioned in the last section. We'll save that for a different episode. But that's the idea that I think could at least make some sense. If it's a 1-for-1 and you get a young player, cost-controlled young player that has some upside that you could plug into the lineup, and maybe, again, he's a better fit for Mike Sullivan's system and his style and all that good stuff. So again, the theme here is that it has to be the correct price, whether we're talking about Lafreniere or Othmann. That's the overarching theme of the three players that we're discussing here. And that also includes the player that we're going to discuss next. And that would, of course, be Braden Schneider, who, has had his ups and downs as a Ranger. I think playing on the top line with Gavrikov has not gone nearly as well as I'm sure Schneider would have wanted, most Ranger fans would have wanted. We'll discuss him and the case for and against trading Braden Schneider. We will do that in just a second. All right, Braden Schneider. So it's interesting with Schneider because I feel like his name has sort of popped up over the years every so often. Some of it tends to be fan created, but there have also been some reports, from different reporters that Braden Schneider is somebody the Rangers could part with under these circumstances or under those circumstances. Obviously, it hasn't happened yet. And I feel like I'm still mostly against the idea of trading Braden Schneider, but I will say you probably have an easier time talking me into it right now than you would have at any other point in Braden Schneider's tenure with the New York Rangers. So we're going to do this as fairly as we can here. We're going to look at the reasons for trading Braden Schneider as well as the reasons against trading Braden Schneider, because I really think there's a compelling case to be made for both ways. So let's look first at the reasons for trading Schneider. For starters, this one kind of popped into my head as soon as I started kind of setting up this episode. It feels like he's somebody who has pretty much hit his ceiling. And that was kind of his MO in the draft. This was somebody that was going to be, a high floor but low ceiling type of player. It's somebody that was going to be a solid, steady defenseman in the NHL, but not somebody who was going to turn into a superstar. And I think we've kind of seen that come to fruition with Braden Schneider. He's been solid. Obviously, he was part of a lot of winning New York Ranger teams. He's mostly held it down on the third pairing. I mean, really, when you look at Schneider, and if you do consider him a third pair defenseman, and you look at the last, 4 or 5 years, however long it's been, cumulatively, I got to think he's one of the better third pair defensemen in the NHL. Not one of them, maybe the absolute best, but he's up there. I would think he'd be in the top 15, 10%, somewhere in that ballpark. He's solid and steady, if unspectacular for the most part, but he has struggled this year when he's been thrust into duty on the top line with Gavrikov. I think another reason why you certainly should explore, at least entertain the idea of trading Braden Schneider is that you could probably get a lot for him. Unlike Lafreniere, unlike Othmann, both of whom we just discussed in the last two sections, Braden Schneider could get you a pretty nice return. I really do believe that. I think you're looking at a first-round draft pick for Braden Schneider, and that might seem a little bit high, but keep in mind, this Ranger team this past offseason just traded K'Andre Miller for a first, a second, and somebody that was considered one of the Kings' better prospects in Scott Morrow. And when you look at trade deadlines in recent seasons, it's always a seller's market. You see teams giving away second round draft picks like it's nothing. And when you've got Braden Schneider, again, a guy that's big, physical, tough, hard hitting, and has been a part of a lot of winning teams. Obviously, there's some playoff experience there, despite the fact that Schneider is very young. I think he's going to have some appeal. You add into that the fact that Braden Schneider at $2.2 million is very affordable. Teams are going to like that as well. Now, at the end of this season, I believe he is a restricted free agent with arbitration rights. I know he's an RFA, but I believe there's arbitration rights there as well. So he will get a raise. But you can cross that road when you get to it if you're a team looking to acquire Braden Schneider. You could trade him somewhere else in the offseason, or you could say, hey, we like this guy. We'd like to extend him and come to a number that you think is right. And, that is a road that I think some of these teams would probably look to go down. But when you look at Braden Schneider's, his metrics this year or any kind of numbers, that they pretty much all go against him. And this is another reason why you can consider trading Braden Schneider if you're the Rangers. There have been 45 goals scored by the opposition this season when Schneider is on the ice at 5v5 play. And that is the most by any player on the Rangers. No player has been on the ice for more 5v5 goals against than Braden Schneider this season. And this is kind of a doozy, too. I saw this from a recent article by Molly Walker, but Schneider has never been on the ice for more than 62 5-on-5 goals this season, and that by far was the most he had been out there for. Right now, he is at 45 such goals, and there are 31 games to go, so he's very likely going to eclipse that number, and obviously that's a number that he would like to eclipse. However, with all this said, there are also some compelling reasons, a strong case to hang on to Braden Schneider through the trade deadline and obviously beyond. The first of which, and I think this is a big one, is you are taking what is already a thin Rangers blue line and you're making it even thinner in both the short term and the long term. You got to remember, Schneider's only, I think, 24 years old. So we're going to talk about that in just a second as well. That's another reason Schneider's, case to hang on to him, because he's not old. When you talk about rebuilding, you want young players, and he obviously fits the description. But we'll get to that in due time. Again, you're going to crush the depth of this blue line, which is already suspect to begin with. Early this season, when the Rangers actually played defense and actually had some structure, we were giving a lot of credit on this podcast to this group of defensemen. I really felt like for such an unheralded and at least on paper kind of shaky group coming into the season, that these guys held up pretty well. To start the season, they weren't really surrendering a lot of goals. Obviously, the goaltending play has something to do with that. But for the most part, I thought they were defending well. And Braden Schneider was obviously part of that. And it's really gone south. Braden Schneider is one of several Ranger defensemen on this team that are not playing as well now over the past month or so as they were for the early parts of the season. I think that's pretty much undeniable for a lot of different Ranger defensemen. So, there's that to consider, but Braden Schneider is also a mainstay of this blue line. And if you trade him, you are taking a thin, shaky blue liner group and you are making it even thinner and even shakier, because the only NHL defensemen on the Rangers right now that are under contract past this season are Adam Fox, Vladislav Gavrikov. That's a good start. I think just about anybody would take that as your top pairing. But then you look at the depth and it's clearly not as good. You've got Borgen, you've got Robertson, you've got Vakanainen, and you've got Morrow. Morrow's an RFA, but I get the feeling he'll stick around. He doesn't have arbitration rights, so I do think the Rangers will, take a longer look at Scott Morrow. But that's not very good. And if you look further into the future, when determining whether Braden Schneider is going to be a long-term member of this team or not, even the medium to long-term future doesn't really look a whole lot better for the New York Rangers as far as their prospects are concerned. I mean, who are the Ranger defenseman prospects right now? You got Drew Fortescue, and you've got EJ Emery. They're both still playing in college. But when they both, obviously move on from college, I would think they would spend some time in the AHL, and that's all well and good. Maybe at a certain point when the Rangers are done rebuilding, those two are ready to go. But I don't know. I mean, we see how the Rangers, how things tend to go when it comes to developing their prospects. When you get somebody that's even a solid, if unspectacular, homegrown player like Braden Schneider, I think it behooves you to hang on to that player. I mean, you can't go nuts with it. I don't want to see them giving Braden Schneider $7 or $8 million a year with a full no move clause, because they'd throw that in there too. But I don't know. I don't know that I'd be so quick to move on from a young, solid, if unspectacular defenseman like Braden Schneider. I think right now he's kind of miscast as a top pair defenseman, because him and Gavrikov have really struggled together. I wouldn't even mind, as a quick aside, seeing the two of them broken up in the next game. I don't think they'll do that, but just to try something different, I certainly would not be opposed to that. But again, you are killing your depth on the blue line if you trade Braden Schneider. And you don't have to force a Braden Schneider trade because he is still young, which leads me into my next point. He is still young, just 24 years old. It's not like this is somebody that you need to clear out of the way to make room for a young defenseman. We just got done talking about the lack of Ranger prospect defensemen that they have in the pipeline. It's not like there's some awesome solution just waiting in the wings and there's somebody on Hartford who's just crushing it and he's knocking on the door and he's ready to kick the door down and join this Ranger team and make a big difference. That player does not exist right now. So for that reason, clearing him out of the way just to do it, I don't really see what the point of that would be. And on top of that, this is something that we discussed just a minute ago when talking about the reasons for trading him. We mentioned, one of the reasons for trading him is that he can get a haul because general managers always like a big physical, tough defenseman. By that same token, the reasons for keeping Braden Schneider, he is a big, physical, tough defenseman. And as we've documented on here, the Rangers need more guys like that and not less. They've had this obsession with becoming a more difficult team to play against ever since the loss to the Panthers in the Eastern Conference Final. And honestly, even a little bit before then, but certainly since then, we've heard time and time again how they need to get bigger and more physical and tougher and all this stuff. So to do that, I don't think the solution to it is trading your 24-year-old defenseman, who's probably the most physical defenseman on the team. I mean, who would even be? I mean, Borgen plays with a good amount of physicality. Gavrikov can lay it in there every once in a while, but it's not really what he's known for. I mean, Robertson, Moro, Vakanainen, no. So, yeah, I mean, this is your most physical defenseman, your most imposing defenseman out there. And for all those reasons, I mean, I felt like I was leaning toward not trading Braden Schneider, and I think I've talked myself into it even more. This is not somebody that I would go out of my way to trade. But again, as has been the theme for this entire episode with all three of these players, for me at least, it all depends on the return. The bottom line, you don't need to force anything. I think certainly you can be open for business, but I would, in the case of Braden Schneider, lean toward hanging on to him. Now, if somebody blows you away and they offer you all these draft picks or this prospect that you really like or any and all of the above, then I think, certainly he's not somebody that should be looked at as untradeable. But again, I'm not looking to force anything when it comes to Braden Schneider. I would hang on to him. I think right now you have to look at how it's gone with him as a top pair defenseman and understand that if you want to keep him and keep him in the fold for next season and beyond, that this is somebody that should not be on the top pair, preferably the third pair. And you can't go nuts as far as the price is concerned for a third pair defenseman. I think he can play in the top four in a pinch, but he's not somebody that should be looked at as the workhorse of this Ranger blue line. And if the Rangers can make that work, if they can sign him to be a third pair defenseman at a third pair defenseman price moving forward, then I think that's the way to go. If not, then certainly you can consider some other options. But let me know what you guys think. Let me know in the YouTube comment section. Send me an email, whatever it might be, about not just Schneider and not just Othmann and Lafreniere either, but your idea as far as what the Rangers should do at the trade deadline. Because there's a lot of conjecture right now. I think certainly there's going to be some changes coming, but we'll obviously cross those bridges as we get to them. For right now, I think we can call it. If you guys would like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @jchick17. Once again, @jchik17. And definitely subscribe to the Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.